This was a time when America experienced the dawning of a new age. When the Say Hey Kid was amazing, everyone liked Ike. We launched satellites into space and celebrities onto television. And so it was that his story began, nearly 1,800 miles away, in a place called Rugby, a small, tight-knit North Dakota town where your word is your bond, hard work is a must, and where giving something back is a badge of honor. Into this time and place, a son of the prairie was born, to a mom who grew up in a sod house and a dad who was celebrated for uncommon leadership. Early on, Don Gaetz internalized the spirit and values of prairie pragmatism, which became a driving force. He excelled at a North Dakota high school where being second best was not acceptable, in a place where people would roll up their sleeves and pitch in to help one another when life got tough. Something Don came face to face with when he was only 16 years old, when he lost his best friend and mentor, his dad. Little did Don Gaetz know then, but his journey was just beginning. It's 1964, and Rugby High makes the decision to compete in a very unique sport, debate.
We were the smallest high school of our type in the state, 400 students. But that didn't mean that we couldn't be good.
Don needed help to up his game and found it in a very unlikely mentor.
It's a Saturday morning and the contest starts and I hear some pretty regular speakers, and then all of a sudden up comes this young man who just lets go.
We had called Wayne Sanstead, who was the debate coach at Minot, the state champion debate coach, and they were always the state champions year after year. He was so gracious. He said, you can scrimmage against us. We'll give you our evidence files. We'll let you come to our practices. We'll share resource material with us all the way until you can beat us.
Of course, I wasn't thinking at the moment, I think, that he was going to go on to beat my own students regularly.
Finally, after a couple of years of trying, we were the state champions. There was a sign over the door of Rugby High School. It said, no place worse than second place.
When I see that kind of leadership role, I say this is the kind of person you want to see in command.
Don's ability to debate opened up another door, Concordia College.
Our family didn't have much money, especially after my father died. So I had to earn my way to college with a scholarship based on a college wanting me.
He speaks in perfect paragraphs.
We'd worked our way through tournaments year after year.
He understands the stage.
And we met the Colossus. We met the national champions, Harvard.
He'd probably be going through his file cards. He'd probably be organizing his arguments to the last moment.
And we won it 5-0. And we went on to win the nationals.
And they were suddenly famous on campus. It was an amazing accomplishment.
For Don Gaetz, an even bigger debate was looming.
Our main issue when he was student body president was women's rights.
It was a very conservative school. When I entered as a freshman, dancing was illegal.
Women were not allowed to smoke at Concordia. Women had hours where they were required to be in their dormitories at 10 p.m. at night, while the men were allowed to run free.
I had to, wage a polite war against the college president.
I would say he's a man of courage.
His beliefs and his principles are sound.
Tremendous courage to have taken a couple of the positions he did, because he was vilified.
So here's the great irony. One of the things that I'm well remembered for at Concordia College is that I championed women's right to smoke, and that I spent most of the rest of my life trying to make things better for people at the end of their lives when they were dying of cancer.
Following graduation, and after helping a family friend revive a North Dakota newspaper to make it the #1 weekly in the state, Don heads to Green Bay, Wisconsin, where his life changes all over again. The year 1974.
We had just started an open heart surgery program, and we had a patient who needed a heart transplant, and I did not know how to get a patient from Green Bay, Wisconsin to Stanford. Don said, "What's the problem, boss?" And I told him this problem. He said, "Just a minute." He picked up the phone and he said, "Hello, Hubert?" He was talking to Hubert Humphrey, the senator from Minnesota. And he said, "I need Air Force One in Green Bay, Wisconsin." And that afternoon, Air Force One landed in Green Bay, Wisconsin to take a barber and his family out to Stanford to await a heart transplant.
Bellin opened the first hospital-based hospice in the nation, and suddenly, Don Gaetz had a new mission.
Dan assigned me to work with a team to put together the first hospice in an American hospital.
When you have a great force for good, it makes a world of difference. The hospice program that Don was exposed to meant a lot to Don, and he certainly took that many notches up in Jacksonville.
The best things you do speak for themselves.
This was just the opener in Don's pursuit of a new way to ensure dignity and compassion at the end of life. It's 1978, and Don joins Jacksonville's Methodist Hospital to help build hospice there. One day at the hospital, while filling a prescription for his mom, Don met his match, and then some.
Well, first of all, I had keys to everything in the hospital because, I was one of the big shots, right? So I opened the door of the pharmacy on Christmas Day, and as the door opened, this young woman looked at me and said, "How did you get in here and who are you?"
My first thought was, who does this guy think he is?
And I, kind of puffed myself up to my full 5 feet 10 inches, and I said, "Well, I'm Don Gaetz."
He does what Don wants to do.
And she said, "I don't care who you are. You see that line out there? You go out and get in the back of that line and I'll take care of you like everybody else, but you're nothing special around here."
He was fairly obedient at that point. He was.
I had to date her.
There were two very memorable events that night.
I was trying to be Mr. Cool, Mr. Self-Confident.
When we approached the intersection of I-95, he couldn't decide whether he needed to go I-95 north or I-95 south to get to the restaurant he was taking me to.
I picked the best restaurant in town.
Since he could not decide which way to go, he was just going to go straight, and I-10 was going to end, and we were going to go off the embankment and land in the Blue Cross parking lot.
We had a lovely dinner.
At the end of the evening, as we were saying goodnight on my doorstep, he pulled my door shut and locked me out of my house.
I was trying to prolong the date.
So Don and I had to go and knock on all my neighbors' doors to find out who had a ladder long enough to reach my second story, and Don scaled the ladder in a white suit to climb into the window and come and open the door. So as you can imagine, when that night ended, I thought, boy, this guy's an accident waiting to happen.
And of course asked her, "What are you doing tomorrow night?"
The next year, on a trip to Tallahassee, Don meets Hugh Westbrook, a South Florida minister and liberal Democrat. Together, they did the impossible.
It was an issue of finding something that will, in fact, work in the system.
Hugh and Don had this vision for how people ought to have the opportunity to live out their final days in dignity.
Hugh and I decided that we would put it on the line.
And they did, by helping pass the first hospice state licensure law in the nation.
We passed the Florida Hospice Act, and Bob Graham signed it, the first law in America that allowed dying people to choose hospice care.
Back in Jacksonville, a young man from Cameroon with terminal cancer reaches out to Don.
He was a student at Jacksonville University, Emmanuel Mookie, a charity patient. He had no money, he had no hope of recovery, and he was thousands of miles away from his family.
Don learned that Emmanuel wanted to go home to be with his people when he died. So Don and I talked about this, and he says, I'm going to get out here and raise the money to make this happen.
So Don makes calls to Washington and arranges for a military transport to fly this patient and 2 hospice nurses through an active war zone to take Emmanuel home.
We got him home, and he was able to live at home in his last days and die at home. This is what hospice is about. This is the most important thing that I've done in my life.
This motivated Don to do more, so he headed to South Florida in 1981 to team up with his newfound friend.
Hugh said, come to Miami and let's develop an organization together. So I said, Vicki, will you move to Miami and will you marry me?
I would have followed him anywhere.
It was the only time she showed shaky judgment. She agreed to both.
But the early days in Miami were tough.
I was working at 2 different hospitals in Miami as a pharmacist, and sometimes my paycheck was needed to help make payroll, make sure that the people who worked for hospice care got paid.
Together with Hugh Westbrook and a nurse by the name of Esther Cauliflower, Don and Vicki pushed forward and prevailed, creating the largest hospice organization in the world.
How fortunate I was to have a guy like Hugh Westbrook, political opposite, in a lot of ways personally very different from me, a liberal where I'm a conservative, but together we put it on the line.
We felt like brothers and had become brothers with each other and worked very hard.
Along the way, Don faced another nearly impossible assignment: to try and establish hospice as a Medicare benefit during tough economic times.
So we went to Washington, 2 guys with, a little bit of contact here and there, but really no lobbyists, no money, no nothing. Just wandering the halls, almost in a caricature of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Not nearly so noble, but at least as hopeless.
They didn't just come to Washington with an idea. They came to Washington with an idea, and they weren't going away.
I was a legislative staffer on Capitol Hill. I was working for Congressman Claude Pepper, a liberal member of Congress from Miami. I vividly remember either I expressed it or I was certainly thinking of it. You have got to be kidding.
Once again, Don and his team refused defeat. The impossible became the law of the land.
And Don did it. Don did it masterfully.
After selling his interest in Vitas, Don reinvested all of himself in his wife and children, moving close to where Vicki grew up, in the Panhandle.
Well, really, Aaron and I both sort of arrived at the same time with this curiosity of, what does Dad do for a living? And, there's always that day in elementary school where everyone goes around and someone says, my dad's a scientist, an engineer, a lawyer, a doctor. And so, we go ask Dad, we say, what do you do for a living? And he had a hard time describing the concept of hospice, to 2 little kids. And so he says, well, I help people die. And the person that was his business partner was Aaron's godfather.
The godfather.
Yeah, so we have the godfather, and my dad is in the business of helping people die.
He also went on a lot of trips.
That's right. So in school, I just said, well, he works with our godfather, and my dad helps people die. And from then on, I think we both got straight A's for a few years.
We did.
From the teachers.
No one took our lunch money either.
When Don grew concerned about the performance of local schools, he decided to come off the bench with everything he had.
He basically became the school superintendent because he showed up to too many PTA meetings. He started showing up because he cared about the schools that Aaron and I were going to.
I really felt that our school district at that time, that I felt we were we were staying off the rocks, but we weren't getting in deep water and safety, and we need somebody like Don to take the helm.
First, Don Gaetz was elected to the Okaloosa County School Board. A year later, chairman, and in 2000 he was elected superintendent of Okaloosa's public schools, where he began a modern-day education revolution.
He set a clear agenda, acted on it. People knew that he was motivated the right reason, and he had great leadership skills. Those matter.
He knew that the teachers he valued them. He knew how important they were. They were the people in the classroom every day teaching children.
The communities in Okaloosa became the highest performing school district in the state of Florida 2 years after he took over.
We became nationally known, Okaloosa County did, for their educational programs.
He wanted to be able to help others, so if they wanted to return and give back to their community, they could.
If you're advocating bolder reform, you really got to be all in. You really have to show your heart. And then lead, just tenaciously drive the changes that are necessary and bring people along. He did that as superintendent.
After 2006, Don heads to Tallahassee to do what he's always done, to lead with courage and by example.
One of his favorite readings is The Doctrine of a Strenuous Life by Teddy Roosevelt. And he draws great inspiration from Roosevelt, and he has made Aaron and I memorize portions of that where Roosevelt says, "It's far greater to dare mighty things and win glorious triumphs, even though checkered by failure and defeat, than
To live in the shadows with those poor spirits who know neither failure nor defeat."
Yeah, that's it.
I hope Dad's proud of that, of that reading.
If we really mean to stand for the welfare of our state and the good of our people, then we don't want to compromise principle. But we need to lock arms at the end and walk off the floor together as friends, not as enemies. If the fight is worth having, then it's worth winning. And if it's worth winning, then it's worth leaving everything on the field. It's worth fighting to the last possible moment to make sure that the cause that you believe in is carried forward as far as it can be in your time.
A philosophy of life and service he's carried with him from his days in Rugby, from a father who lived his life that way.
He was the best man I ever knew, though I only knew him for 16 years. He worked 3 jobs and still had time for public service. And he believed we were not entitled. He believed we were obligated to our community and to our state, to our country.
Being married to Don Gaetz for the past 30 years has been an incredible journey. I feel like the luckiest girl in the world.
He was my best friend. I wish he were here today, not just because it would make him proud, but because I think he would say, "You got it, kid. You finally figured it out. That life is not about what honors you achieve or what victories you win. It is about the obligations you take on yourself."